The quiet betrayal. The prairie dawn broke in strokes of amber and rose, painting the endless horizon with quiet majesty. A rooster crowed somewhere behind the weathered barn, and the rhythmic creak of a windmill carried over the still air. Ethan Cole, a giant of a man with hands calloused from decades of work, stood before the corral gate, his silhouette a fortress of endurance against the rising light. He moved with unhurried purpose, checking fence lines, feeding horses, and whispering to the cattle as though they were old friends. To him, every dawn was sacred, every breath a promise that the land would yield if treated with respect. Inside the ranch house, Lydia Cole watched him through the lace curtain. Her eyes did not reflect the dawn's warmth. They were cool, distant, lined with the quiet ache of discontent. She had once loved the simplicity of ranch life, the smell of hay, the steady rhythm of days, but that love had soured into restlessness. The land that had once represented freedom now felt like a cage. And her husband, kind and steadfast as he was, had become part of the bars. The kitchen clock ticked heavily, marking time she wished would move faster. Lydia's gaze drifted to a folded letter on the table, its seal already broken. The handwriting belonged to Victor Harland, the man whose name had lately lingered too often on her thoughts. A railway magnate with a smile like a drawn blade, Victor had come to town months ago to discuss laying tracks through rancher territory. He had offered Ethan a fortune for a portion of his land, but Ethan refused. "You can't buy the heart of the earth," he'd said. Lydia had admired his conviction then, until she realized conviction didn't fill an empty wardrobe or a silent house. The letter's words burned in her mind. "The train leaves at dusk. Meet me by the water tower. There are better lives than this one, Lydia, if you're brave enough to take them." Ethan entered the kitchen, brushing dust from his sleeves. "Morning, darlin'," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. His touch was rough, honest, unaware of how it now repelled her. "Sheriff Reed's stoppin' by later. He says Harlan's men been sniffin' around the border fence again." "Of course they have," she muttered. "Railways don't stop for fences." He smiled faintly, thinking she was joking. Maybe not, but a man has to protect what's his. The words hit her harder than he knew. What's his? The phrase clawed at something deep within her, the quiet rebellion growing like a crack in glass. She pulled away under the pretense of tending the stove. "You worry too much," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. Outside, the whistle of a distant train split the silence. Ethan paused, head tilted, as if listening to an omen. Lydia didn't meet his eyes. By noon, the sun hung mercilessly over the plains. Ethan hitched the wagon and rode out to mend the northern fence, leaving Lydia alone. The moment his figure vanished beyond the ridgeline, she exhaled the breath she'd been holding. From the wardrobe, she withdrew her traveling dress, a pale blue gown wrapped in the scent of lavender and gilt. At the edge of town, Victor Harland waited beside a gleaming carriage, his dark coat catching the wind like a banner of power. The tracks behind him stretched endlessly, iron veins feeding progress or destruction. When Lydia approached, his smile curved with practiced charm. "You came," he said softly. "I shouldn't have," she whispered. "But you did." He offered his hand, gloved in black leather. "And that's what matters." She took it. The contact was electric, dangerous. He leaned closer, his voice low and persuasive. "You deserve more than a rancher's dust and a life measured by harvests. The world beyond these plains is waiting. I can give it to you." Her pulse quickened, not just from desire, but from the lure of escape. She glanced toward the horizon, where Ethan's ranch lay small and insignificant against the vast sky. "He trusts me," she murmured. Victor's eyes gleamed. "Then he'll never see it coming." A freight train thundered past them, roaring with metallic fury. Steam hissed like a living thing, wrapping the world in white noise. Lydia watched it vanish into the distance, her heart pounding in rhythm with the wheels. When the silence returned, something inside her had shifted irrevocably. That night, Ethan came home late, weary and mud-stained, unaware that betrayal had already set its course. Lydia met him at the door, her face calm, her voice gentle. "You should rest," she said, pouring him a drink. He smiled, grateful. "Couldn't do this without you, Lydia." As he drank, she turned away, unable to face the man whose faith she no longer deserved. The whistle of another train echoed faintly through the night, its cry long, mournful, and full of warning. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and indifferent. The stars above burned like witnesses, silent and unblinking, to the first quiet act of treachery that would soon set love, land, and loyalty on a collision course with fate. And far across the ocean, on a ship bound for America, Mei Lin folded her hands in prayer, unaware that destiny was already laying its tracks toward her and the broken man she was meant to save. The tracks of treachery. The storm began at dusk, rolling over the plains like a living beast. Dark clouds twisted into spirals above the open land, their bellies heavy with thunder. Lightning flickered across the horizon, illuminating the lonely stretch of railway that cut through the Cole ranch like a scar. Ethan Cole guided his horse along the muddy path, his coat drenched, the brim of his hat dripping with rain. Beside him, Lydia rode in silence, her gloved hands tight around the reins. "Strange night for cattle to wander," Ethan said, his voice raised above the wind. "You sure you saw tracks by the rail line?" Lydia nodded, avoiding his gaze. "I did. Near the crossing." Her lies slid off her tongue as easily as breath. Every word was a needle pricking her conscience, yet she spoke them with practiced calm. She'd spent the entire day convincing herself that what she was doing wasn't murder. It was necessity. Victor's plan had seemed simple when spoken in the glow of his lamplight. One staged accident, a train at the right moment, and her husband's death would free her from this life of dust and drudgery. But now, as rain lashed her face and Ethan's silhouette rode steady beside her, doubt clawed at the edges of her resolve. They reached the crossing, a narrow stretch where the railway curved through the valley. The rails gleamed wet and black, vanishing into the storm. Ethan dismounted, lantern in hand. "Tracks might have washed out," he muttered, crouching low. His massive frame glistened in the rain. "I'll take a closer look." Lightning split the sky, revealing two shadowed figures behind the rocks. Victor Harlan's hired men, waiting with rope and steel. Lydia's breath caught, but she said nothing. Her silence was the final act of betrayal. When Ethan straightened, confusion flickered in his eyes. "Oh, Whitey, what's—" The ambush came swift. A blow to the back of his head sent him sprawling into the mud. Lantern shattered. Darkness swallowed them. Ethan struggled, roaring like a wounded bull, but the men were quick. Ropes coiled around his wrists and ankles, pressing his giant body against the cold ground. "Lydia!" he gasped through the rain. "What's happening?" Her name on his lips tore through her, but she stood motionless. Victor emerged from the shadows, his voice smooth and steady. "Just business, Cole. You should have sold when I offered." Ethan's glare burned, even through the blood running down his face. "You snake. You used her." Victor smirked. "She made her choice." The words struck harder than the rain. Lydia turned away, trembling. Her vision blurred. Whether from tears or storm, she didn't know. Victor's men dragged Ethan toward the tracks, binding him across the rails. His massive chest rose and fell, the strength of a man who refused to die quietly. "Lydia," his voice softened now, almost pleading, "you don't have to do this." She bit her lip until she tasted blood. The memory of their wedding flashed, his hands shaking as he placed the ring on her finger, the promise of forever echoing between them. Forever now seemed like a cruel joke. Victor leaned close to her ear. "If you're going to falter, do it after he's gone. Not now." A train whistle screamed in the distance, long, sharp, and final. The sound made Lydia flinch. Victor signaled his men and stepped back, coat flaring in the wind. "Harlan!" Ethan roared. "You think this'll wash clean? Men like you end up under their own steel." Victor laughed and turned away. "We'll see." The ground shook as the approaching locomotive thundered closer, its light cutting through sheets of rain like a blade. Lydia's heart pounded. The sound was unbearable. Iron against iron, thunder against the earth. "Lydia!" Ethan shouted again, louder this time, desperate. "Look at me." And she did. For one fleeting instant, their eyes met through the storm. There was no hatred there, only heartbreak, disbelief, and something that looked painfully like forgiveness. Her knees gave out. She fell to the mud, sobbing, but the train was already upon them. Its headlamp burned white-hot, steam hissing like fury incarnate. Victor grabbed her arm. "It's too late." But something in her broke. With a cry that split the storm, Lydia tore free and ran toward the tracks. Victor lunged to stop her, but she slipped from his grasp. "Ethan!" she screamed. The train screamed back, metal shrieking on metal. Sparks exploded as its wheels bit the rails. She reached out, too late. At the last moment, a blinding flash of lightning illuminated the scene. Then, as if by miracle, the rails ahead appeared empty. The train thundered past, shaking the ground, leaving nothing but smoke and silence. When the world stilled, Lydia stared at the empty track in disbelief. The ropes lay severed. Ethan was gone. Victor cursed under his breath. Find him. He couldn't have gone far. But even as his men scattered, Lydia felt a strange certainty bloom in her chest, a whisper of something beyond her understanding. He had escaped. Somehow he had lived. Far down the tracks, the faint glow of a lantern moved through the mist, small, distant, almost unreal. A stagecoach rattled by the crossing moments later, its single passenger peering out the window, a young woman in a worn silk gown, Mei Lin, newly arrived on foreign soil. She saw only the storm, the rails, and the echo of something unseen. As the rain eased and thunder rolled into memory, Lydia stood trembling, consumed by guilt. Somewhere in the darkness, Ethan Cole was alive, and the world had shifted forever. The stranger's touch. The rain had ceased by dawn, leaving the world wrapped in a hush that felt almost holy. Mist clung to the fields like a shroud, softening the edges of fences and trees. Along the deserted railway, Mei Lin walked carefully, her silk slippers ruined by mud, her hands clutching a small bundle that held all she owned. She had come halfway across the world chasing a promise, a husband she had never met, a home she could not yet imagine. But promises, she was learning, had a way of dissolving in the light of reality. The distant groan of iron wheels fading into silence had led her here, and now she paused at a bend in the track, heart pounding. Something dark lay tangled in the weeds near the rails, a shape too still to be debris. She hesitated, then hurried forward. It was a man. Ethan Cole lay half buried in mud, his face pale beneath a layer of soot and rain. Rope still clung to his wrists, frayed where they'd been cut. His shirt was torn, his breathing shallow but present. Mei Lin knelt beside him, trembling. The scent of blood mingled with earth and iron. "Sir," her voice was soft, accented, careful. No answer. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck and felt a pulse, weak but alive. Relief flooded through her. She dragged him, inch by inch, away from the rails to the shelter of a nearby barn whose roof sagged like a weary prayer. Inside, shafts of morning light pierced through the gaps in the wood, falling in golden strips across the straw. Mei Lin tore the hem of her dress into ribbons and began cleaning his wounds, her hands steady despite her exhaustion. Hours passed. The storm had taken its fury with it, leaving behind the smell of wet hay and smoke. Ethan stirred at last, eyes blinking open, confused and wild. He tried to sit up, wincing. Where am I?" "You are safe," Mei Lin said quietly. Her English was halting but clear. "You were hurt. I find you near the train." He studied her, still dazed. The world swam before his eyes, then settled on the sight of the stranger tending to him with gentle precision. She couldn't have been more than 24. Her dark hair was bound loosely at her neck, her face calm, yet resolute. Ethan's voice rasped. "You pulled me off the track." She nodded. "Yes." The train almost come. He tried to process it all. The storm, the betrayal, the flash of Lydia's face, the roar of the locomotive. Pain speared through his skull. "My wife," he began, then stopped, the word catching like a thorn. Mei Lin looked away. She could read the grief even without understanding the words. "Do not speak now," she said softly. "Rest." He lay back, staring at the ceiling beams, the enormity of what had happened pressing down on him. Lydia's betrayal burned behind his eyelids, the coldness in her gaze, the way she hadn't run to save him. Every memory of her now tasted of poison. Mei Lin moved quietly, setting a small fire in the barn's hearth and preparing a broth from her pack. The rhythmic sounds of her work, pouring water, breaking herbs, stirring, were strangely comforting. When she brought the cup to his lips, he accepted it without protest. "You're not from around here," he said hoarsely. She smiled faintly. "No, from China. I come to marry man in America." Ethan frowned. "And did you find him?" Her eyes lowered. "He is gone. Not honest man." For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them was not awkward. It was understanding, deep and wordless. Both had crossed oceans of trust and found betrayal waiting on the other shore. When the firelight flickered, casting their shadows long against the barn walls, Ethan finally said, "Then it seems the both of us were left behind." Mei Lin looked at him, and for the first time since leaving her homeland, she smiled without pain. "Then maybe we walk forward," she replied simply. The words lingered, small but powerful. Ethan watched her as she rose to feed the horse tethered outside. Her movements were graceful, deliberate, nothing wasted, nothing hurried. He felt something stir within him that wasn't anger or despair, but quiet gratitude. As evening crept in, Mei Lin returned with a damp cloth and fresh water. She worked in silence, cleaning the last of the dried blood from his hands. Ethan's eyes drifted to the lantern light reflecting on her skin, and he wondered at the strange mercy of fate, that a stranger, an ocean away from her own sorrow, had saved him when everything he loved had turned to ash. "You risked your life for mine," he murmured. "Why?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "Because someone must stop the train." The answer was simple, yet it cut through him. In that moment, Ethan understood. This woman did not act from duty or debt, but from compassion, the kind his world had long forgotten. Night deepened. The wind outside softened into a whisper, carrying the scent of wet grass. Ethan felt sleep pulling him under, but his last vision was of Mei Lin sitting beside the fire, head bowed, the flames painting her features in gold. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the barn, the faint whistle of a train echoed, distant, harmless now. And in its fading cry, Ethan Cole felt something new awaken, not vengeance, but the first fragile pulse of peace. Ashes on the iron road. The morning sun rose like a blade through the mist, slicing gold across the horizon. The storm had washed the land clean, but for Ethan Cole, no rain could rinse the weight of betrayal from his bones. He stood before the barn where he had healed, his broad frame still marked by bruises and old rope burns. Nearby, Mei Lin gathered her few belongings, her movements quiet, deliberate. For days they had spoken little, yet silence between them had grown rich with understanding. "You could stay," Ethan said finally, his voice low, roughened by both gratitude and sorrow. "There's room on the ranch, more than I could ever fill alone." Mei Lin met his gaze, her expression soft but steady. "You have things to finish, shadows to face," she said simply. "When the road is clear, then you decide who stays." He nodded. She was right. He could not rebuild on foundations still rotted by deceit. Lydia's face haunted his memory, the way she turned away as the train bore down, the echo of her voice swallowed by thunder. He had loved her once with all the faith a man could give. Now, he would meet her again, not as the husband she betrayed, but as the man she failed to destroy. By noon, Ethan saddled his horse and rode toward town. The landscape shimmered under the new sun, a vast sea of gold and dust. Each hoofbeat carried him closer to the wound he needed to close. At the edge of the settlement, the railway crew had returned. The ground trembled under the weight of their machines, and the new track gleamed, an unbroken ribbon of iron slicing through what was once coal land. Victor Harlan stood at the center of it all, his fine coat immaculate despite the dust, barking orders with the self-assurance of a man who believed he owned the world. Beside him, Lydia watched in silence. The bright dresses and gold jewelry Victor had given her no longer looked like freedom. They looked like chains. Her eyes were rimmed with sleeplessness, her skin pale. Every time the train whistle blew, she flinched. When Ethan appeared at the far end of the street, she froze. He rode slow, unhurried, the kind of calm that precedes a storm. Townsfolk stopped what they were doing, whispering. They'd heard the rumors, how Ethan Cole had died, how his land had changed hands. Yet here he was, living proof that justice still had a heartbeat. Victor's smirk faltered. Well, I'll be damned. The giant lives. Ethan dismounted, boots sinking into the dust. Takes more than a coward's rope to kill a man who built this land. Victor's voice hardened. Careful, Cole. You're trespassing now. This property belongs to the Empire Rail Company. Funny, Ethan said, stepping closer. Last I checked, it still bleeds with my sweat. Lydia's voice broke through, trembling. Ethan, I thought. He looked at her then, and she fell silent. His gaze wasn't cruel. It was heavy with something worse, disappointment. From his pocket, he drew a small, charred circle, his wedding ring blackened by fire. Without a word, he placed it on the table between them. The sound of it striking was louder than any shout. I buried the man who wore that, Ethan said quietly. He trusted too much. He worked too hard for love that wasn't real. Lydia's breath hitched. I made a mistake, she whispered. I was foolish. No, he interrupted gently. You were hungry. You wanted more than what we had. I can't hate you for that. He turned his eyes toward Victor. But I can end what you started. Victor sneered. You think you can stop progress? The railway doesn't bend for farmers. Ethan stepped closer, towering over him. No, but it breaks men who stand too close. For a heartbeat, time held its breath. Then, in the distance, the faint rumble of an approaching train grew louder. Workers shouted warnings. The ground trembled again. Victor, distracted, stepped backward, too close to the rails. Ethan didn't move. The whistle screamed. Steam burst from the engine's maw. Lydia shouted his name, but Victor's foot slipped on loose gravel, and in the next instant, the tycoon who thought himself untouchable was gone, swallowed by the very machine he had built. When the smoke cleared, silence blanketed the town. Lydia crumpled, sobbing. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Ethan looked down at her, eyes filled with quiet pity. It never is. He turned and walked away, leaving her kneeling in the dust as the train rumbled into the distance, carrying the echo of everything they'd lost. By the time he returned to the ranch, twilight had fallen. The horizon blazed in orange and crimson, a sky on fire, cleansing what the earth could not. Mei Lin waited near the gate, her silhouette framed by the setting sun. You found peace? She asked softly. Not peace, Ethan said, but an ending. She nodded, understanding more than his words revealed. Together they stood in silence, watching the tracks that cut through the plains shimmer in the dying light. Somewhere, far away, a train whistle called again, not in menace this time, but as a lullaby. Ethan turned to her, his voice quieter than the wind. You were right, Mei Lin. Shadows fade when you walk forward. She smiled, the kind of smile born from pain, turned to strength. Then let us walk. They did, two figures moving into the open country, leaving behind betrayal, fire, and ghosts. The rails stretched ahead like lines of fate, gleaming beneath the stars. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan Cole felt that the road, though hard and uncertain, was truly his own.